The letter was still warm when she found it, pressed beneath the cold brass weight of her father's inkwell, folded in thirds as though someone had intended to hide it, yet left it precisely where she could not fail to see it. Lady Arabella Wyndham stood in the doorway of her father's library, the hem of her ivory morning gown grazing the oak floorboards, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. She did not move. She did not dare, because she recognized the seal pressed into that dark crimson wax, the seal of the Duke of Ashmore. And whatever lay within those folds of parchment, she already understood with the peculiar certainty that only a woman's intuition can provide, that it had the power to ruin everything. She crossed the room slowly, her slippered feet silent against the floor. The fire had burned low in the grate, and the library was wrapped in the kind of cold that creeps beneath your collar and settles against your spine. Morning light, thin and gray, barely pierced the heavy velvet curtains. Her fingers trembled as they closed around the letter. She unfolded it, and the world, as she had known it, ceased to exist. Before we go any further into this extraordinary tale, if you are new to this channel, welcome to the Duke's Lost Letters. This is a place where history breathes, where scandal whispers, and where love is never, ever simple. If you find yourself captivated by what you are about to hear, please do take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every subscription truly does matter more than you know. It is what allows these stories to continue finding their way to you. Now, for those of you who have been here before, beloved, faithful listeners, thank you, truly. Now, let us return to Lady Arabella and to the letter that changed everything. The words were written in a hand she did not recognize, jagged, urgent, the ink pressed deeply into the page as though the writer's hand had shaken with fury or with fear. It was addressed to her father, Lord Wyndham, Baron of Keswick, and it bore a single devastating accusation, that His Grace Edmund Harrow, the Duke of Ashmore, the very man to whom Arabella had been betrothed for 7 months, had, in secret, contracted a prior marriage, a marriage to a Miss Helena Forsyth of Somerset, performed not 3 years past in a private ceremony witnessed by 2 servants and a country parson whose silence had, apparently until this very morning, been purchased. Arabella set the letter down upon the desk with a steadiness she did not feel. She pressed her palms flat against the mahogany surface and closed her eyes. She thought of the Duke's countenance, that composed, angular face, those grey eyes that always seemed to be measuring the world and finding it wanting. She thought of his voice, low and deliberate, the way it had spoken her name at their first proper introduction in the Marlborough ballroom, as though the 2 syllables of Arabella were something worth taking care with. She had told herself she did not love him yet. She had told herself there was still time for affection to grow, slowly, sensibly, as it ought between 2 people of their station. But standing now in this cold and shadowed library, with that letter burning beneath her palms, she understood that what she felt was not the absence of love. It was the terror of losing something she had not yet dared to name. By afternoon, the news had spread through the county with the ruthless efficiency of a winter storm. One cannot say precisely how, whether it was a servant who spoke out of turn or a solicitor whose discretion proved insufficient, but by the time the candles were lit in the great drawing rooms of the neighborhood, the name of the Duke of Ashmore was on every tongue, and not 1 syllable of it was spoken with kindness. At Mrs. Featherington's card party, the whispers were so thick they nearly displaced the air. "They say the woman is very much alive," declared Mrs. Featherington herself, snapping her fan open with the practiced flourish of a woman who relishes catastrophe. "Living in Bath, no less. Can you imagine the impropriety, the sheer, breathtaking impropriety of it?" "I always thought there was something cold about the man," replied Lady Hurst, pressing her pearls against her throat as though they might protect her from the scandal. "Those eyes of his, never quite trustworthy." "And to think of poor Lady Arabella," added another voice from across the room, with a sympathy so theatrical it could have graced the Drury Lane stage. "What a humiliation! What an absolute humiliation!" In her father's sitting room, Arabella heard the carriages passing in the lane outside, and knew, with the bone-deep knowing of a woman born into a world that has always watched women, that each one carried a passenger eager to position themselves on the correct side of a freshly drawn line. Society, it seemed, had already rendered its verdict. The Duke was guilty. The Duke was dishonorable. The Duke had deceived them all. But Arabella sat very still in her chair by the window, and she did not quite yet believe it. And now, dear listeners, if you are still with me, if this story has its claws in you as deeply as I suspect it does, please do subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters if you have not already done so. We release new stories every week, and each one is crafted with the same devotion to detail, to drama, and to the magnificent, maddening complexity of the human heart. One click truly makes all the difference. Now, back to Edmund.
The Duke of Ashmore arrived at Wyndham Park on foot. Not in his carriage, not with his footman, not with any of the trappings of the considerable fortune and title that had, until yesterday morning, been his uncontested armor against the world. He arrived on foot at dusk, his riding coat dusted with the evidence of a long and solitary walk, and he stood at the front door and asked, with a quietness that was more devastating than any raised voice could have been, to speak with Lady Arabella. Her father refused him entry. Arabella heard the exchange from the first landing of the staircase, her fingers curled around the banister, her heart hammering against the cage of her ribs. "You will not set foot in this house," her father's voice rang upward. "Not after what has come to light, not after the disgrace you have brought upon my daughter's name." And then Edmund's voice, low, steady, stripped of every pretension. "My lord, I am asking only for 5 minutes, not to excuse myself, not to beg your clemency, but because your daughter deserves the truth from my own lips, and not from the mouth of a letter written by a man who has wished me destroyed for 3 years." There was a long silence. Arabella descended the staircase. Her father turned at the sound of her footsteps, his face drawn tight with protective fury, but she met his gaze and held it, and something passed between them, some old wordless understanding between a father and a daughter who have always, in the end, trusted one another. And he stepped aside. Edmund Harrow, Duke of Ashmore, stepped into the hallway. His grey eyes found her immediately, and for a long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. "The letter," Arabella said, at last, "was not written to enlighten us, was it?" "No. It was written by Mr. Gerald Forsyth, Helena's brother, a man who has been attempting to extort money from my estate since the day Helena and I—" He paused, drew a slow, controlled breath. "Since the day Helena died, 15 months before I ever set foot in this county, before I ever heard your name." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every assumption that the county had made, full of every whisper that had rippled through those elegant drawing rooms, full of the terrible, fragile possibility that the world had been catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. "There are records,"
Edmund continued, his voice quieter now. "A death certificate, letters from the parish. My solicitor has prepared a full accounting of every document. I did not bring them with me tonight because—" and here, for the first time, something shifted behind those composed grey eyes, something that looked very much like vulnerability. "Because I did not want you to think that I came here to defend my title. I came here because you looked at me once, Lady Arabella, across a ballroom, as though I were worth something beyond all of this, and I find I am not yet prepared to surrender that." Arabella was quiet for a very long moment. Then, softly, resolutely, she said, "Show me the documents." The trial, such as it was, lasted 3 weeks in the court of public opinion, which is always the most punishing court of all. The documents were produced, verified, and circulated. Mr. Gerald Forsyth was confronted, exposed, and quietly removed from polite society forever. And the Duke of Ashmore stood before the county, not vindicated by ceremony, but by truth, which is always the slower and more enduring of the two. The betrothal held, and on a clear morning in late October, as autumn gilded the grounds of Ashmore Manor in amber and gold, Lady Arabella Wyndham placed her hand in Edmund Harrow's and decided, at last, to name the thing she had felt standing in that cold, candle-lit library. It was love. It had always been love. It had simply been waiting with extraordinary patience for the world to stop its noise long enough for her to hear it. And that, dearest listeners, is where we leave them. Not at the altar, not in the grand declaration, but in the quiet moment just before, when two people who have endured the very worst that gossip and malice and misfortune can deliver, look at one another and choose, anyway, to begin. If this story moved you, if it kept you company for these 10 minutes and made the world feel a little richer, a little more dramatic, a little more alive, then please subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters. Leave a comment below telling me which character spoke to your heart most deeply. Like this video, share it with a friend who loves a good Regency scandal, and come back next week because I promise you the next story is even more devastating. Until then, I remain your devoted narrator, and the letters, as always, are never truly lost.